I've learned over 20 years of being a doctor is that if I could change one thing in every person that I work with, or anyone in the general public, let's kind of expand this. It's a relationship with food.
Hey, I go by knowledge, and I done tour the world. And the more I see, the more questions I got. But things are getting crazier. Misinformation is everywhere. So I'm on a mission to find the best minds with answers on how we fix it. It's time to drop some knowledge. Let's go. Welcome to another episode of Dangerous Knowledge. Today, my guest is one of my favorite doctors online. And that's because my whole life, I was plagued with something that millions of others share, which is ADHD. I would say, was the biggest thing holding me back for so many reasons all my life. So it's been a decade struggle for me to find the path that I'm on today. And I'm happy to say it's through that I've become the best version of myself. It was learning how to tame the worst parts of ADHD and how to make it into my best friend. But since I've been following Dr. Ali Ajaz, he's an MD with over 100,000 followers on social media for a reason. And that's because he gives some of the best advice I've seen, because not only the stuff that I've learned in the past completely resonates with what he says, he also has offered me total insight and surprises I had no idea. And just as important, there's a ton of influencers out there that I think are giving horrible information. And I think that's why I'm so happy to have you as a guest today, so you could set the record straight. Welcome to Dangerous Knowledge, Dr. Ajaz.
Well, thanks for having me on. Well, an introduction. It's an honor and pleasure.
I can't wait to get into this. So, do you yourself have ADHD?
It's a common question, and I don't know why people ask me that. But no, I don't. So I'm as probably neurotypical as you can get. But I've worked with so many people with ADHD over the years, and it's really through that experience that I've learned so much. And every day I'm learning, and I'm learning through the patients and the people that I work with. So I have lots of experience, hundreds and hundreds of people over the years with ADHD, and that's really what is important for me, and how I'm able to get out information and knowledge and insights that resonate, because it's based upon real people and not things that I've read or just kind of
which. Right. And I think the fact that it's not a personal experience makes you more objective. And, for me, like I said, I've watched these influencers, and I don't want to say they're entirely bad, but I do think some of their information is not helpful, and we'll get into the details. But when you have someone like yourself, you look at the data first. Is that your way? And also anecdotally, how do you sort of bridge the two?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think we should be curious about why our doctors work the way they do and what decision-making process there is. Because unfortunately, a lot of medicine is protocol-driven. So if you've got this diagnosis, then these are the steps we need to do, regardless of who you are as a person, regardless of your medical history, regardless of anything specific about you. So for me, as a clinician, I've also spent my career part-time as an academic. I worked for one of the leading medical schools in London, Queen Mary University London, as a lecturer and researcher, and also a teacher. So I've had lots of experience in research, conducting research and reading research papers. So for me, it's really important. Before I'm able to advise anything, the research needs to be there. And for me, as a clinician working in the more holistic space, the more functional health, we're moving beyond potentially dangerous drugs to things that have to be effective but also safe as well. We don't need doctors introducing more dangerous things. And I'm not anti-medication. There's certainly a role for medication, but there are lots of problems that can come with that. So for me, it has to be more natural. There has to be evidence for it, and it has to be safe as well. And these are the things that I have to factor in before I start recommending things to the people that I work with.
And I couldn't agree more. As someone that's found, when I was young, my parents did seek, medical doctors, and they gave, very powerful medication. And as I look back, I can tell you unequivocally, the single most important thing is diet for myself. It was learning the foods that work with my body that made the most important changes. Do you find that with your clinical experience?
It's so powerful, Will. I think for children, the first option should never be medication.
Right.
Now, for some kids, they need the medication because other things don't work or the circumstances are such. So medication can play a role, but it's never the first thing I think about. And it's for children, it's always what goes into your body as you're developing, especially, will affect how you grow, how you develop, how you think, how you behave, and your overall health. So food is so important. And this is something from, ancient times. People knew that food was your medicine. And it's
Yes.
the most powerful medicine. And if the food isn't right, then it's very difficult for other things, to be as effective. And then we end up just relying on drugs to numb and get rid of symptoms, but they come with a whole bunch of side effects. So
Right.
absolutely, food, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, food is up there as one of the most important things.
Now I have a suspicion too. Like, my family is very type 2 diabetes prone. To this day, I have a very, very high craving for sweet foods, sugars, starchy. I love pastas. I love bready breads, chocolate bars. But I would say that's my kryptonite, because I had to remove that stuff from my diet to truly be effective, and it hasn't been easy. I still guilty of indulging, What do you find? What are the foods for you? What does the data say?
So before we go into the data, the number one thing that I've learned over 20 years of being a doctor is that if I could change one thing in every person that I work with, or anyone in the general public, let's kind of expand this. It's a relationship with food, because often our relationship with our food, we may love the food, but the food certainly doesn't love us back, and it's a problem. It ends up becoming an
I love
abusive
that.
relationship. So we're all in an abusive relationship.
We're in an abusive relationship with food. I love that.
I'm sorry to break the bad news.
I love that. I am so stealing that.
So, and part of it's not our fault, because the food industry is very clever, of course.
Yes.
It's them to be very clever. So the way they manufacture these foods, they kind of hack our brains. Okay, they stimulate us just enough to get a kick, not too much, but it leaves us wanting more and more.
Right.
And in particular, if you are neurodivergent, if you've got ADHD, for example, you're going to crave these foods because they do stimulate.
It makes you extra vulnerable.
Absolutely. So I see that a lot in terms of dopamine-seeking behaviors, but also impulsive behaviors. So there are certain people that are even more vulnerable to the food. But the problem is, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if the food available on mass scale was actually nutritious.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's not. So, in these busy times, parents are busier, kids are even busier now. So much stress is on kids.
Right.
We eat for convenience, and anything that's convenient, you save on the time, but you sacrifice on the quality and the nutrient dense nature of the food. So many foods out there, especially the ones that are big starchy, carby meals,
yes,
not that nutrient dense at all. So what we're finding, and the data is very clear on this, that people are less nutritious food is less nutritious than it was 30 years ago, and people are increasingly having nutrient deficiencies that they're just unaware of. So again, if we zone into one condition like ADHD, and I'm going to use ADHD as lots of examples because it's really a passion and interest of mine.
Yes.
And so if we look at ADHD, about 15 to 20% of kids with ADHD are deficient in omega-3 fatty acids.
Yes.
Really important for your brain, because that's the stuff that your brain is made out of. We need a constant supply of that.
Okay.
About 30 to 50% of kids with ADHD are low in ferritin. About 30 to 40% also are low in zinc. These are really crucial nutrients that help not only overall brain function, but specific things like dopamine and other neurotransmitter synthesis in the brain that are really crucial when it comes to ADHD. So we're seeing nutrient deficiencies in kids with ADHD, for example, but this, I think, extends out to the rest of the population. And the really interesting thing...
So sorry to interrupt, but almost like canaries in a coal mine.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right.
And if you're low on one, you're much more likely to be low on more than that.
Right.
The really interesting thing is that we now have research, clinical trials, placebo-controlled, randomized clinical trials that show if you replenish nutrient levels in kids with ADHD, you improve the core ADHD symptoms. And that's a game changer. That is an
Yes.
absolute game changer because it shows what we all know intuitively, that nutrients are important for your overall health. Nutrients are important if you're suffering with your mental health. Nutrients are important if you've been diagnosed with psychiatric conditions or disorders. Nutrients are important for all of us, full stop. And the reason why we eat is to have nutrients from the food to fuel us. But not enough of us are eating foods that fuel the brain. And in
Right.
fact, that many of the foods are toxic. So it's this kind of twisted relationship we have with food, and our governments and our food industry are more than happy for us to carry on doing that.
Right, because
Unfortunately,
they profit off of getting us to eat more, less nutrients.
it's not a conspiracy theory.
No, it's just
This is
profit. It's
absolutely
their
fact.
their goal is to maximize profit for shareholders.
Yes, yes,
And that means getting people to eat as much as possible.
yeah,
And that means processing foods in a certain way. There's nothing
yeah,
conspiratorial about it.
absolutely.
And it's so that's why it's up to government policy to say, no more.
But unfortunately, yes, unfortunately, government policies let us down both in the UK and the US, like and across
Yes,
the world.
everywhere, Canada. And the sad thing is, it can be fixed. I was in Poland,
Hmm.
and I saw a color coded system, and I asked people, and I mean, it was pretty straightforward what it meant, right? It was green good, red, you know what I mean? Very simple. And I was like, well, I wonder where they came up. So I started doing some research on the internet. Turns out it was an American professor who pioneered this, and I actually had him on my podcast. And incredible, simple system that really wouldn't take much to implement. And this guy is, when I say obscure, he doesn't have any social media. He doesn't care. He's a little grumpy. When we came to our hour, he looked at his watch like, all right, let's get this over with. And I was like, here's it. And like, this guy was such an interesting guy. I tried to give him credit for helping millions of people. He's like, well, no, I had this person. He didn't want to take any of the credit. And, so what is something we can do? Like, how do we get a simple system like this to work on a national, international level?
So for me, the most important thing is trying to empower people by taking ownership of their health and
Yes.
starting with what they put into their body. So it doesn't become, oh, well, there's no evidence about this or the science isn't there, which it is. We should move beyond what doctors are saying about health because doctors are there for disease
Right.
and they're there to stop symptoms of disease. They don't really know much about health. So we need to actually take ownership back as citizens
Right.
of citizens of the world. We need to take ownership back for our own health, and it starts with
Right.
what we put into our body. No one else is going to do it. Everyone's happy with the status quo, right? So nothing's going to change,
So,
and then
so,
on the
so
change.
I'd like to add now. Now, this is where it can get controversial, right? Now, I don't know if you've heard of the Food Babe. Are you familiar with her?
No, I'm
She's
not.
so she started this whole movement here in the U.S. She has no medical training, and she started this massive movement to start against food dyes, and I think a couple of preservatives. And she's in with the new health secretary Robert F. Kennedy, and are you familiar with Callie Means? I'm sure you know who Casey Means. She's now Surgeon General. Well, her brother, who has no medical training either, so I would say a lot of their information, as best as I know with science, is actually not factually correct. And then they do make some dubious claims. Now, what's your take on food dyes, for instance? Is there a link with ADD, ADHD? Like, I believe that's what she claims.
Yeah. So there is a link between food dyes and worsening of ADHD symptoms,
Okay.
processed foods, sugar. So the evidence is there supporting that
Okay.
these things are not only harmful for the brain, they'll make things worse.
Gotcha.
And I see it in my own practice when I ask people to cut out the things that are harmful for their brain, the things that promote inflammation in the body.
Right.
Some people can make amazing progress. So just on
Yes.
gluten alone, for
I'm
example.
guilty. I'm one of these people. So
And for some people it's very clear and very obvious. For other people it's more subtle. But that's
right.
because it's different. ADHD is a different
Right.
thing, different people. The things that contribute in different
It's complicated.
percentages. Yeah,
So
yeah,
so I'll give you my personal greatest food that I eat that transformed my life. My diet is now 75% legumes, nuts, seeds, legumes. I'll throw them into a pressure cooker and I'll throw some spinach, kale, broccoli, and it's a superfood for me, man. Like, I feel dynamite. I feel energized. I feel mentally, I can tackle the whole day. And there's just seems to be something about the composition of legumes. Now, you talk to some food influencers, they'll say legumes and spinach contain, I think it's phthalates or something. There's some type of chemical. What's your experience? Is there certain foods we should be eating if we have ADHD?
So what I recommend is, again, keeping it simple. So you reduce the carbs, so you have lower carbs.
Yep. But just to interject there. Now, legumes are high in carbs, but they don't seem to have the same impact for me.
Yeah. So it's the simple carbs, really, the carbohydrates that get broken down into chemical sugar very quickly. They're the ones that cause.
So that's sugar,
So
breads, pasta.
yes, refined sugar,
Gotcha.
bread, pastas, rice for a lot of people. But
Rice for me too.
Yeah, but the more complex carbohydrates are often more beneficial. They get broken down at a slower rate, but also if you're looking at nuts and seeds, they contain vitamins and minerals that are really important. So some of the things that you've mentioned are high in zinc, high in iron, and they're very dense.
See, I didn't even think about that. Right, because pumpkin seeds, I know are high in zinc.
Yeah,
and I ate tons of those.
Yeah.
Wow, you're right. And see, I'm just learning now.
Yeah, we've got nuts are very high in selenium. I know by personal experience because I used to eat a lot of them, and then I tested it, and my selenium was through the roof. So I was like, okay,
fascinating.
It must be the Brazil nut. So that's why it's not hidden science. It's very clear. So if you're eating the foods that are more nutrient dense, and we know that most people with ADHD have some form of nutrient deficiency. When you put the two together and you reduce some of the toxic food, things
that combination, it creates miracles. Because this is where I would say, so that was the first step. The second step for me was supplements, and we'll get into that. And this is where it's been especially beneficial for me because I've been frustrated my entire life because I have been known as an underperformer since I was a kid, right? I was the kid that would, ace a test. I'd literally get 100%. I still remember, being in university and economics classes, sometimes, getting 100%. The next test I would get, barely a passing grade. And I would have this inconsistency my whole life that even I didn't fully understand. And so, the first step now, realizing, looking back, it was my diet. And then now, as I've really felt like I've unleashed, I've learned some surprising things. So one of my favorite things about your channel is you actually talk about these surprising special traits about people with ADHD. What are these things? Because I look at them and I thought, I take these for granted. Like even your latest post about why, something about superior intelligence. What are these surprise things that ADHD people have?
So it's astonishing. So some people are just excelling when it comes to things that really interest them. And partly because that's the hyper focus that they have. So if you love what you do, if you love your job, people with ADHD can really excel. And I see people achieving the most remarkable things. So most of our entrepreneurs, they can't work in an office space.
Right.
They have to do their thing and they have to do it their way. And they can really make amazing achievements and gains within that.
Guilty as charged.
And that's great. However, what I also see is that there's a payback.
I was going to say.
Because the rest of their life is generally a lot more chaotic and a lot more stressful. And that's the space that someone like me, that's my kind of remit to help balance that out a bit more. So kind of high achievers. So that can surprise a lot of people. They think, if you've got ADHD, you've got a problem. you're dumb or you're intelligent or you're unintelligent. There's something there's something slow about you. Not at all. Many people with ADHD are super intelligent, but some people can't get through kind of exams and things like that. Other people kind of just wing it, and because they're smart anyway, it doesn't take a lot for them. But it's got nothing to do with intelligence, the ADHD. But I see a lot of high achievers with ADHD. But then there's other signs like uh, impulsive behavior is often people think, well, you're just a bit kind of chatty because you talk all the time, so you get kind of nicknames. Oh, you're the one who just talks a lot. You're the chatty one. It's impulsive. Um, uh, some people have like super high sex drive, and they just get kind of bad reputations for being promiscuous. But that's an impulsive behavior, which is also part of kind of dopamine seeking. Other people develop like eating disorders because the food, they eat too much, but then they know it's too much, and then they have to try and manage that and in unhelpful ways. Other people kind of addictions. That's surprising. Lots of people who are addicted to recreational drugs, often things like cocaine. People who are addicted to alcohol, often because it's just the only thing that help calm them down. People that are addicted to weed, again, it's the only thing that calm all the noise down in the brain. A lot of these people have ADHD because it's undiagnosed and they can't find anything else that works. And so a lot of these kind of surprises I see through the years of working with people. So there's pleasant surprises, and then there's things that are a bit more tragic. But this is just the mosaic of ADHD. It has different faces to it, and some pleasant and others quite scary.
Well, I liked some of them. I'm going to go over some like ADHD and superior thinking. Like, talk about some of those. I just saw your post on that, and like talk about that.
Yeah. So people with ADHD, they see things. They can see things. So it doesn't apply to everyone, but the people that have these traits in a stronger way, they can see things differently to average people. So they can foresee patterns and join up dots in a way that someone like myself just can't. I just can't, because I'm thinking in a linear way. People with ADHD think outside of the box, more likely to. They don't follow the usual way. They find their own way because the convention doesn't suit them. So when you've got thoughts jumping from one to another, you're able to make connections in a more creative way, but also often in a quicker way. You don't have to process things in the way that you've been taught, that everyone else does. So it gives people an advantage. They're more creative.
I've seen that myself. I was, even being in my economics program in university, nobody's ADHD but me. I'm the party guy. And yet I was able to see links and connect dots in ways that I felt like and to this day, I feel one of my greatest assets and blessings is I really can bridge both worlds. As I was talking to you, there's a record label in London that I might be getting on board with. And, every record label, every management, they're always shocked at how business-like I am behind the scenes. And that's because, most creatives are ADHD, which I have, and that comes with good and bad. And I was obsessed with trying to tone down the bads, because you're exactly right. I have had a history of impulsivity. I have had a history that's gotten me into trouble sometimes because of that. And I started deducing stuff, and I'm going to ask you this in real time because I've come up with some unique things myself that I think have truly had a massive impact, and I wanted to get your thoughts on them. Now, with ADHD, the thought is, there's a low working memory. So like, people, with high IQs tend to have a larger working memory. And I always felt that was a bottleneck in my intelligence pathway. And then I found out about something called the dual end back. Are you familiar with the dual end back exercise?
I'm not. No.
So, please research this. So what it is, it's a mental exercise. And what it does, you're supposed to recall both a visual and an auditory signal in steps. So at an N2, it'll call a letter. So it'll say A, and then it'll be a tic-tac-toe grid. And then the A will be it'll be a dot, and then it'll say A as the dots in the, say, top corner. And then the next one will be a dot, say, on the other side with the letter L. And then the next one will be, if it's an A, then it's an auditory match, so you click the one button. And if it's a visual match, you connect the other button. So now this could be an N2, an N3, and it gets progressively harder. It gets very, very difficult. And I remember doing this, and it was very mentally taxing at first. And I could tell you that it has had an utterly profound impact on me, and its effects are very, very lasting. So it's the only exercise that I know of that's known to improve IQ. But I would say with somebody with ADHD like me, it's had a far deeper impact. It really seems to have improved my working memory. And on top of, everybody knows about meditation. That's had a very big impact as well. I mean, off the top of your head, does it sound like it would make sense? Or am I thinking too deeply into it?
No, it makes perfect sense, because no one has to accept the brain that they've been given. Okay, so, we don't choose the brains we've got. So we're adults,
right?
And we're growing, but we've got a brain, but we haven't chosen it.
Right.
We can change our brain by investing in a whole range of things. And what I find in my experience, if you invest in your brain, you're always going to get a return. It's not a gamble. So because the brain is so malleable, adaptable, what we call neuroplastic, it's always eager to adapt and change and learn. If you train it, it can have very powerful effects. Now, if you've got ADHD, that training is more painful, especially at the start. So it can put a lot of people off. And you use the example of meditation.
Yes.
People with ADHD can meditate. It's just a lot more difficult, and it takes a lot longer, but you eventually get there, and the benefits you get from something like meditation
are enormous.
And again, the research and the studies around meditation and ADHD, are numerous.
Yes.
So that's one example. That the type of brain training working on the working memory, that initial few seconds before information gets stored in the short-term memory, it's a problem with a lot of people with ADHD, but it's not something that you just have to accept. You can train it. And so that makes perfect sense to me.
Good. Yeah, I would love to talk about it after this conversation, seeing, I could show you this. I'm sure you could look up the studies yourself. And, there's been some sort of conflict with that. Some people claiming it doesn't have as big an effect. And I can say for me, it has. And really, I can trace my pathway to when I first started doing that. And one of the key things is using, modern apps to organize my thoughts, and having a scratch pad on my phone of just being able to vocalize ideas instant. So that's another thing with ADHD that I think is a superpower is, I come up with ideas left, right, and center, but you need a way to organize them. You need a spontaneous way to just, idea popped. Hold on, let me grab my app. And vocalizing it, to then having a way to organize. And I show other people with ADHD, and again, this is my frustration, because I don't think people have done the work that I have. I knew it was my bottleneck in life, and I knew I had to fix it. So now I'm going to tell you about another one that I think has had a absolutely life-changing impact on me, which is TDCS. Are you familiar with transcranial direct current stimulation?
I am, yes.
So I am the biggest fan of it in the world. What's your thoughts on it yourself?
So I first came across it as a treatment for depression.
Right.
And for people who don't know, it's like a band that you put on your head. And
yes, it's electricity.
Yes, it puts very small microcurrents on the front of your brain.
There's to be clear, there's different montages, so you can actually arrange them, and where you arrange the positive and the negative determines its impact.
I think it's more sophisticated since the last time I looked into.
Probably, maybe that's something we should talk about after, because I can tell you, absolutely life changing.
So it's a type of brain stimulation.
Correct.
And we know that we see that for people, it's very interesting. For people with depression, it can really help. And
Yes.
it's a good treatment because you can do it at home. You don't need to go to a doctor's office or a clinic, or go to have all these expensive kind of treatments like magnetic stimulation, which is very expensive. So it's relatively inexpensive, and it's something that you can do at home, and the data is very strong on it. But the interesting thing that I'm aware of, when you apply direct current to the brain, it reduces threshold for learning.
Really?
And some people, there was a device that came out some years back, and it was encouraged. It was something to make you remember things better, or to be smarter. It was kind of some marketing slogan with it. And what it did was, through very small microcurrents, they showed that it reduced the threshold for learning. So if you were trying to learn something at the same time as having this device on, which essentially is a TDS device, people were learning quicker. So there's something about kind of hacking the brain.
Yes.
That this type of device does, and it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so there's different, they're called montages. So depending on where you arrange them on the brain. So like literally you arrange them in a certain way and it creates greater insight. So like, they've done these mental exercises where logic won't get you to the solution as fast as being quote unquote illogical. And the way they create this montage, it suppresses a certain part of the brain to allow you to be more creative in your thinking. So it's absolutely fascinating work. Again, I'd be happy to show you the one that I use and the different montages that I've had, because you're absolutely right. And it seems like no matter what montage you use, I find personally, virtually all of them do exactly what you suggested, which is it puts you in the best mood I've ever been in. Like truly fantastic. And I would suggest some of the montages go as far as drugs, like feeling dynamite after, like we're talking MDMA, like a very sort of modest MDMA.
Well, that's amazing. And another reason why that works is because we know that ADHD is grounded in neurobiology. Okay.
Yes.
So it's like everyone's got ADHD. You just everyone's it's a neurobiological thing. It's not made up.
Right.
It's very clear in the research that shows that people with ADHD who present with ADHD have underactive parts of their brain. So we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is underactive. We've got parts in the parietal lobe, in the cerebellum, in the corpus callosum, which communicates between the two sides of the brain. That its activity is less than what we would see in people who have neurotypical brains. So if we're looking at it from that perspective, if we have something also that's stimulating and increasing activity and blood flow in those parts of the brain, so the montages is interesting, the different orientations, and we can talk more about that. I'm really interested, but that would also fit that you're addressing a neurobiological issue, and not something which is a societal thing or just a screen thing.
And knowing what I know about the brain, and again, I'm sure you're the expert here, so I don't know if you've heard the saying, neurons that fire together wire together. And so my hypothesis is that TDCS reinforces the right connections as well on top of that, because I can tell you from using TDCS over years, it's had a tremendously positive impact on me. And, I just got my first ever, and full disclosure, I actually got my first ever brand deal, and it's very modest. I actually approached them because this company, they're not even on Instagram. Like they have a very, very, very modest social media following. They're very low key, and yet I would say their passion for producing a great, and they also do, and their device does TDCS, TACS, which is using alternating current along with a couple of other modes. I mean, they're very, very passionate. And, I've talked to the designer of it. I'm like, you guys are incredible. You need more people. And they were very modest about it. And they're like, we're happy with the following we have. And I think I would suggest to them to send you a unit to try, because I've found it life-changing for myself.
Well, I'm certainly all up for that. So we'll hopefully talk more about that afterwards. But
yeah.
But it's a really interesting point you make about neurons that fire together, join together,
wire together,
because the brain's losing neurons every single second. So we lose about 85,000, give or take, neurons every day. So the older we get, we're losing neurons. Our brains are deteriorating, and it's a natural process. It's not to be alarmist, but there's billions and billions of nerves. So, so it's not necessarily something to worry about. But how can we, the older we get, keep younger and healthier?
Right.
It's all centered in your brain and your brain health.
Right.
And if you're doing new things, if you're learning new things, you are firing neurons in the brain that wouldn't be activated otherwise.
Right.
When you fire, it reinforces them. They're less likely to die off because you're using them.
Right.
You're more likely to have nerves that die off that haven't been used for months or years or decades.
Right.
So much of us, we are on autopilot, and we're comfortable doing the things we're doing. And what our brain does when it comes to comfort, it goes onto autopilot because it's saying, well, why do you need to exert your brain power? It's like a self-defense mechanism.
Right.
Let's kind of go on this auto ease pilot because, you know, that's helped conserving energy. It's a kind of I think, evolutionary defense mechanism, but it's not necessarily the best thing for us in the longer term.
Right.
So the more we learn things, they're never too late. What do they say?
I love that. So keep stimulating your brain, doing new exciting things. And as an ADHD person, that's great because we love novelty. You know.
So I am probably the least coordinated person ever. Like, I can't skate. You know, I can't ski, but I bought a skateboard not that long ago because I thought, well, you know, I'm going to learn something new, and I'm going to help keep my brain young. It's a type of investment. I'm going to come over this.
I love it.
Overcome this phobia of falling and being kind of rubbish. So, you know, it's a way of pushing myself and self-development. So, you know, it's just a skateboard, right? And also, when I was a kid, I always thought it was like the coolest thing ever. But I was quite an overweight kid, a chubby kid, and it was just something that I never thought of doing, you know, back then. But now I think it's something that I want to get on top of. So
fantastic.
If I can try and do something like that, then anyone can learn anything new, and maybe, you know, explore something that they've wanted to do when they were a kid.
I love that.
Had the opportunity.
I mean, for me, yeah, I turned 50 next year, and I toured. I did a few tour dates with Ice Cube, you know, the rapper.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? I'm gonna rap. You know, I'm a DJ, but I'm like, let me rap. So I found this viral producer online, great beats. I said, can you send me some beats? So for the first time ever last year, I rapped in front of 10,000 people in Seattle. You know, I thought that, you know, they loved it, so that was cool. And hopefully with this record label, I'll start making more, right? And so keeping that novelty in your brain is so critical. Nutrition, cutting the right things out of your diet, and then of course eating the right foods. Now, what about supplements? Is there things that you can take with ADHD that help you harness it better or tone the bad parts of it? Is there any suggestions there?
Absolutely. So supplements play a really key role in my ADHD protocols. So as well as cutting out foods that are harmful, focusing foods that are nutritious. Most people need supplements because often the food is not enough.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's just not enough. For some people, yes, but for a lot of people, especially those who struggle with making those food changes.
Right.
Having a supplement regime becomes even more important.
Okay.
And what we see from the data is it can be as effective or more effective than the medication over time without the side effects. And I've seen that from the research, and I've seen that from my own direct clinical experience as well. Some people don't want to be on the meds. Okay, fine. We'll just stick with the supplement protocol, and 2, 3, 4 months down the line, because they do take longer to work and to have an impact, people report, but my focus is better, my concentration is better, my mood is more settled, my sleep has improved. So being on an ADHD focused supplement regime is really important. And so there's a baseline of 3 supplements that I recommend to everyone.
Okay.
Now, there's many more, but I think if we have these kind of pillars,
these are the top 3.
These are the top 3. So the first one is a high dose multivitamin, and we're looking at addressing those likely multiple nutrient deficiencies. And the research using a product from Hardy's Nutritionals, which is a Canadian company, and they teamed with a New Zealand research company, a research facility, and they have lots of research that they've done in ADHD kids in particular. And what they've shown is that if you add in high dose micronutrients, you can get up to 50-60%
Oh,
improvement in
wow.
symptoms, and it's massive.
Yeah.
And I read the book and the research, and I got in contact with Hardy's. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I said, look, I've got to use the same stuff that's in the research. So I started to use these high dose micronutrients, and it's been a game changer for many people. Now the downside is you have to take them regularly over the day, and you have to take them over 2 or 3 months. But people who persevere with them always
The payoff is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. The second thing,
so good multivitamin.
Yes, so high dose multivitamin. The second thing is a high dose omega-3 supplement. So we're looking at 3 to 4 grams of omega-3, and as we've said, omega-3 is really important because that's what the brain is made out of. So the brain is like a squishy substance. About 70% of that is made from these fatty acids,
right?
Omega-3 fatty acids, DHA and EPA. So you need a constant supply of that. And the research has shown improvement a bit more modestly, about 10 to 20% with the omega-3s if you replenish them. But everything has an accumulative effect. And that's a beauty of supplements versus medication. Because
right.
the more you add, you can add things and stack things because they're safe. As long as you understand what you're doing, they're generally very safe for most people. So if you if you have the micronutrients that have their own evidence base, and then the omega-3s that have their own evidence base, so you've got one stack, and then on top of that, I recommend a high dose probiotic. So we're looking at over 100 billion CFU per day. And again, that's based upon research that shows high dose probiotics improve ADHD symptoms. Now, people might be thinking, well, probiotic isn't that just bacteria? What's that got to do with brain health? Well, your gut health and your gut microbiome, which is where most of the bacteria in your body, trillions and trillions of bacteria in your body reside, they actually run the show. For every one human cell, you have about 9 bacterial cells. Okay, so we're only about 10% human. We're only 10% human.
Okay. Fascinating.
They run the show. So they run your immune system, for example.
And there's like a gut-brain connection, right?
Well, we're not taught anything about gut-brain connection in medical school. I don't even know whether it's still being taught now. It is if I'm teaching it, but I don't know anywhere else. And the gut-brain is fundamental. So we've got, for every one message the brain sends to the gut, the gut sends multiple messages back to the brain. So it communicates via hormones, chemicals, the nervous system. Vagus nerve is one of the big communicators from the gut all the way to the brain. And it is such a fundamental relationship. And what we're seeing is that if you improve the diversity and add and increase the bacteria in the gut that we know that are good for us in general, at a certain level, that's going to have an impact on the brain. And for ADHD in particular, the research has shown 100 billion CFU per day of either lactobacilli, bifidobacterium, some positive bacteria.
So I eat sauerkraut and yogurt, Greek yogurt. Will that satisfy the?
Great. Well, sauerkraut is full of prebiotic fibers, and they're actually also really good. So what the prebiotic fibers do is they're fuel for the bacteria that are already in your gut. So it allows your gut to make more of what it needs.
So what's the best food for the probiotic?
So because probiotics are strains of bacteria, it's slightly different. So you've got foods for prebiotics that can give you prebiotic fibers through the food, but the probiotics are actually bacteria that you're introducing directly into the gut.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there a food or is yogurt a prebiotic or a probiotic?
So the interesting thing about yogurt is that if you add your probiotics to the yogurt and ferment it a bit, you can actually get kind of explosion of the concentration of bacteria.
So you should take a probiotic supplement and add it to yogurt?
So, so you can. So some people make. So you can look up recipes where people add probiotics to yogurt and ferment it and then take it, and that actually is much more powerful than what's in the capsule.
Fascinating.
But things like Greek yogurt have kind of healthy fats. If it's good quality Greek yogurt, I recommend that as well for sure. It's something that you can have kind of needs and seeds and nuts with Greek yogurt in the morning. It's a great breakfast. It's a fat dense, protein dense breakfast, which will help you focus and concentrate and set you up for the day, rather than toast and a croissant. That's just going to give you a blood sugar spike.
Totally. Literally, the way they've been training us for years is all wrong, and it's not as a kid, I could tell you if my mom had, I don't know if you guys in the UK have Captain Crunch or any of these cereals, but man, my mom did her best to keep them away from me, and I would hunt those things down when I was a kid. Where is that Captain Crunch box? So my mom tried. But now my son doesn't get any of that. None. Zero. He's 3 years old, and I've done some stuff that's a topic for another day to help him with supplements. And he's shown tremendous, incredible ability in math, and stuff. I mean, he's multiplying into the 20s and he's 3 years old. It's incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I'm thinking about putting some of these videos. I've posted them on my personal Facebook, and people are, awestruck. Oh my God,
it's AI. It's AI.
No, there's people that have literally accused me of training him to say, no, I'm like, no, he's doing this himself. He watches shows about numbers all day. He's obsessed with math. That's all he wants to do. But then, so I wanted to get into my list of supplements, and I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, that's good.
So I've got my list here. So this was off your suggestion. So this is a derivative. Hold on one sec here. It's a Chinese herb, faux tea. You mentioned that in one of your posts, and I had to hunt. It was a TSG. Is it like in its other name? Is that did I get the letters right?
Yes. So it contains it's a herb.
Yeah.
Called Polygonum multiflorum, and it contains an active ingredient in the herb called TSG. And in a study that came out just about a month ago, it showed that TSG by itself, significantly improved ADHD symptoms. And it's because it's from a herb, it didn't have any side effects.
None. I can tell you, for me, I started using it 2 weeks ago. Incredible.
Yeah.
I'm using it right now.
Well, that's amazing. I think with the studies, they have to extract and have things in a systematic way. So if you're giving it to different people, you need to know what they're taking.
Right.
And so there was a pharmaceutical company in Japan, this is where they did the research, that kind of prepared it. But that doesn't necessarily stop people who are inquisitive to take readily available herbs. So it's not something that you have to go on the dark web or the black market.
No, it was $20 for a 6-month supply on Amazon.
So people are selling these for health and well-being in the first place. You don't take herbs for anything else apart from wanting to be healthier. And so these things are readily available, and if it helps, and it's my job as a doctor, as a researcher, as someone who is committed to learning and sharing knowledge with people, I think it's only right to do that. And I never tell anyone to say, well, you have to take this now, or you must take it, or this is how you take it. I can't give people medical advice, on my post on social media. If you're not my patient, I can't give you medical advice.
Right.
But I can bring information to your attention, and you're an adult human being.
And they're safe, like you said. So it's not like I'm harming myself. And then I would go further and say, so it's a combination of stuff I've found over the years, and I add things slowly, incrementally. And I do believe there's an incremental synergistic effect that's happening on me. And I really feel like two things have happened. So like I talked about when I was young, here I was, I remember I was I was quite a scoundrel when I was a kid in high school, and I remember taking a provincial exam in Canada, and I was kicked out of my homeroom. So I was in the 10th grade, and I went to a 12th grade homeroom. I took an English exam where I scored a perfect grade, and that was very rare. And again, the stars must align nutritionally for me at the time. But then I would get poor grades and other things. And I would say the number one thing that this has done for me is created a consistently high level for myself like I've never had before. And you know what I want to add to this? Another critical part was cutting out alcohol. So I've never done any drugs. I've never done cocaine. I've never done any other drugs. I've almost cut alcohol entirely from my diet. And I think that's had a huge, huge impact as well. And what's really created the synergistic effect is, and I never used to drink caffeine because I found it just wired me too. I got incredibly wired. So I would take so now what I've learned is I just take small doses of caffeine with L-theanine, and then I combine other things. So here's my list. Ashwagandha, alpha-GPC, L-tyrosine, or L-dopa. I don't take them at the same time because one's the precursor. Same thing with alpha-GPC. There's also cytocholine. And then I also take niacinamide. And I find like B12 and these high doses of B vitamins, they do seem to have an impact as well. And now here's some ones that aren't. Now, we all are hearing about creatine. Everybody's talking about the cognitive benefits of creatine now. That's all the rage on social media. But I'm going to add something that I think synergizes with creatine, and that's nitric oxide dilators. Things like AAKG. I can't remember what alpha ketoglutamate. I can't remember the full name of it. There's agmatine sulfate, citrulline malate, and these nitric oxide vasodilators seem to have a very, very synergistic effect with all these things. And then this also seems to is adenosine triphosphate, ATP, as well. Now there's a few others that I use, Bacopa, and people talk about Bacopa Monieri, but I would say the one that's really, really slept on to me is this combination of these vasodilators with creatine, and then caffeine seems to accelerate all this stuff. And the key is not to use too much caffeine and to take at least 2 days a week off where you don't use it. I don't know. That's a big list. Would love to. What's your thoughts? Am I crazy?
Well, you're not crazy. You're,
okay, good.
You're inquisitive, and you're motivated to lead the best life possible. So
Thanks.
You recognize that your brain needs additional support.
Yes.
And no one's going to give you that support. You've got to find it yourself.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, it's the knowledge, and then it's the courage to try and experiment with things in that way, and to trust yourself to be sensible about it. So, I think that's amazing.
Thanks.
But
you just came up with a zinger that I got to write down. Knowledge takes courage. I think I should take that. That should be my slogan with my DJ name, right? Knowledge takes courage. Anyway, sorry. I digress.
But it's not typical, you see. So most people with ADHD won't do what you're doing.
Right.
What I see, the people that make the most progress with supplements do what you do. That they take what I suggest as a baseline, and then they add to it in their own inquisitive way.
Yes.
Because that takes a process, because supplements are less kind of regulated in terms of dosage and quality. So we can't say the same thing about different manufacturers for supplements. So you have to be comfortable titrating it up yourself. So if you start with 1 a day, move on to 2 a day, 2 twice a day, going up to a level that you're comfortable with and evaluating what's going on. Some people find that just too uncomfortable. In fact, most people find that uncomfortable,
right,
and difficult to think. Well, it's not my thing. So what I find is that if we start with that investment in directly in your brain health to improve nutrients, to improve gut health, that most people will make significant amounts of improvement. But those people either that don't make enough improvement or want to make even more, then we have a whole range of things. And you mentioned a lot of things that are really helpful. So with the L-tyrosine, it's a precursor for dopamine. We know that this brain chemical that's responsible for motivation, for reward, for focus, is lower in people with ADHD. So if you've got the precursor for it, you're encouraging the brain to make more of it. So tyrosine gets converted into dopamine. But you need nutrients for that. That's the thing that people don't tell you. You need nutrients. You need things like iron. You need things like zinc in order for that to take place. So that's why these things can work synergistically together. So L-tyrosine is great. You mentioned a lot of things which are essentially herbs. So most of these things are herbs. So the hyperazine A, it's a herb that works on improving another neurotransmitter in the brain called acetylcholine. So it helps more levels of acetylcholine hang around longer in the brain. And acetylcholine is important for attention, working memory, learning. And it also has kind of neuroprotective effects for the brain as well. So a lot of these things are herbs, and a lot of these things are natural. They work directly.
What about alpha GPC? So that's like a chemical as well.
So that also works by boosting acetylcholine.
So it works synergistically, would you say, with huperzine?
Yes. So the alpha GPC gives you the precursor for acetylcholine. So it encourages the brain to make more. What the hyperazine A does is it slows the breakdown of all the recycling of acetylcholine in your brain. It slows down it being taken up from between the neurons. So that both together are working to really give a good boost of acetylcholine.
So I'm on the right track, would you say? Like, are these?
Yeah, I mean, well, the litmus test is if it's working, if it's helping.
I think it is. So here's what you ever heard this? There's a saying in marketing, and they say, a marketing corporation will say we spend $1 million on marketing, and only half of it is effective. I just don't know which half. And so with this, I'm kind of it's like throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. I think most of it is helping a little bit. And I think there's a synergistic effect happening.
Yes.
What I can say for certain is I am able to far more prolifically create at a high level. And that is what has truly allowed me to excel in the last year versus my entire life. Like I'm 49, and even I use a meditation device that measures your brain waves, and measuring my brain waves, they're at a 20-year-old's level. So it's exciting to know that I'm doing something right. I think, right?
What I would add to that is it's important for me in the way that I work to try and do things as systematically as possible. So you can have different approaches, but try and create systems around it. So it's, as you say, you can either start with everything or just throw lots of things and stick with those for a period of time, but you don't know what's helping and what isn't. You have to start cutting some of the things out, start reducing or cutting out. And it's that, by trial and error, by deductive process, you take things out. Am I still okay? Or have things declined? So just as much as we're eager to add things, we also need to take things away in order to really learn the impact that they're doing. And then also, if they're working synergistically, then that adds another layer of complexity. So am I taking it away? Is it working? Is it not working just by itself, or is it not working because it's not helping something else I'm taking? So that inquisitiveness needs to carry on as much as adding, but also taking things away to really understand, because I think we owe it to ourselves. And also, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing.
Yes, I've thought about that myself. Yes.
Yeah, we don't know enough about these herbs. We know that they've been around for a long time.
Right.
Ancient Chinese medicine's been around for centuries.
Right.
But it just doesn't mean we should take everything that we can for as long as we can. So I always encourage people to take breaks from whatever strategies that they're using. Aside from the food, aside from the diet, if you're on meds or if you're on the supplements, especially if they're herbal based, take some breaks. Give yourself a break.
Yes.
Reintroduce things back. Let's see how things are, because some of the things work by improving the overall health of your brain. So the 3 things that I mentioned, the omega-3s, the multivitamin, and the probiotics, they work by improving your brain health. So your brain upregulates how it's working. There's other things that, like the mechanisms of, say, alpha GPC, it works on receptors of the brain. But when you take it away, it has that effect goes away. So it doesn't do anything necessarily to improve the overall health of the brain. So there's certain things I think people need to carry on, and other things you can add in and take away. But
and then
you have to be careful. There has to be some degree of caution and some degree of a systematic approach to it. And taking breaks is important. And even the people that I have on medication for ADHD, it can work really, really well. But I always encourage breaks.
Agreed. I do that.
Yeah.
I think that's so, you brought up a good point earlier. So you think that nutrition, because of the processing that's happening in foods, can we infer that ADHD has increased because of that societally? What's a way forward for us?
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of the most important questions, and I don't have a direct answer for it. I have my own theory, which is that overall, if we look at all health metrics, although people are wealthier than they've ever been before in the West, look at it from the countries that we're familiar with, countries that we live in, people are more sicker than they've ever been.
Yes.
And when you have sicker people, sicker adults who get together, they're going to have children that are more likely to have certain problems.
Yes.
And so that's my kind of overarching kind of view on it.
I agree.
We are sicker people, and we're having children that are more likely to have problems. And there's a whole bunch of research that supports that. So one of the causes of ADHD, and I'm very particular about the words that I use, a cause. And this is what the researchers concluded. This was researchers in Japan, and they looked at expectant mothers. And they looked at inflammation levels. So there's certain markers in the blood that you can take that show levels of inflammation, which is your immune system being overactive. And they tested all these women. And then when they had the children, and when children were 8 years old, they tested them for ADHD. And what they found was that children were more likely to have ADHD with mothers who had high inflammatory markers.
Fascinating.
So inflammation gets passed down from mother to child. And
epigenetics.
Epigenetics. It's all about the environment. There's very few.
We're learning that so much, how critical all of this stuff is.
There's very few conditions that are genetic disorders. Okay, lots of people like to talk about ADHD as being genetic, but you'll not find in any textbook telling you that ADHD is a genetic disorder like something like Down syndrome.
Right.
Because it's not a genetic disorder. Some people have certain genes that make them more susceptible to developing ADHD.
And this is why government regulation, which is, I believe, the reason we have been heading towards dystopia, despite the fact, like you said, on a relative scale, we're wealthier than ever. And that's because we've started to deregulate virtually everything, not recognizing this importance of environment on outcome.
Environment is the most important. And
yes.
If we look at the research papers that try and synthesize all the genetic studies that I've done on ADHD, and I read one about a year ago, and it was what we call a systematic review. It looks at all the papers and puts it together and has a meta-narrative. That's what we call systematic review. And they couldn't identify enough consistent genetic changes to say, well, this is why someone has ADHD. And I remember counting them all up in the paper, in that one kind of review paper. There were about 30 to 40 different genes that they named. But they didn't say, well, this is what we're going to use as a genetic test for ADHD because most people will have this. It was nowhere close. There's so many different genes involved. And what they concluded at the end, and I was astounded by this, I was pleased to read it. They concluded that the environment is more important. And these are
I agree. I agree.
ADHD, and they talk about environment and the epigenetics, and it's clear, but it's a type of dogma that's in modern day medicine, where doctors essentially can't explain why people get sick because they only look at symptoms. So the catch-all answer is, well, it's genetic. You have a genetic reason or a genetic risk, and they totally disregard how you live your life, what you put into your body, how active you are, how happy you are, what kind of psychological experiences you've had, traumas that you've had in your... They don't look at any of that as though none of that matters. Okay, it all matters. Everything you experience impacts your whole being.
I couldn't agree more.
Physical being. There is no distinction. So this is the challenge we have.
And this is where I see it as my personal mission and this is why I was so excited to have you, because I really believe in a holistic life. And for me, that's music. And this is why my question to you now is my final question to you. Is there a role for music? Have you seen studies that link the harnessing of music with harnessing ADHD?
Yes. And it's very clear. So it can depend on the type of ADHD that you've got. So there's a clear study showing a really interesting hack for people with ADHD, but more so if it's the more inattentive type, but there's less hyperactivity. So using this kind of white noise. So it's not quite music, but we're talking about sounds and the impact of sounds on the brain. But white noise for people with inattentive ADHD can work wonders to help improve their focus and concentration. If you've got more hyperactive ADHD, it can make things worse. So
I was going to say that's what I have. I have hyperactive.
Okay.
So for me, I can tell you again, anecdotally, beats, especially faster beats, I would say almost any beat, so BPM, beats per minute, have an impact, and they are very much a way of setting a tone in my head, but not during. Like, so if I'm in an intensely where I need a lot of thinking, I find the best thing is silence, complete silence. But preparing myself with music is the best way to prepare. And then I find it actually improves my learning. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, music is such a varied thing. So we've got different types of music. So if you look at music that's calming and relaxing, that can really help people, especially with ADHD, prepare for like sleep, for example, if they're kind of high anxious states. 3, 4, 5 minutes of some kind of calming or kind of intense slow music can really make a big difference. Other people need more intense beats, especially when things are quite mundane. It's something that's stimulating. So music can be a very safe and effective dopamine hack, right? So we don't need that donut. So instead of the donut, we've got the CD. Well, it's a bit old now, everything's streamed, but they look similar in terms of shape. But music can be that dopamine fuel.
Yes.
And what I
think, but with the metered beat, it seems to have, like you said, it's this dopamine fuel, but there's something about that repetition that seems to help harness it for me, at least in the pre-stage of any time I need to do intensive thoughts or an intensive mental engagement.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, like personally, we've established I don't have ADHD, but I find that music is something that helps me manage stress. And I didn't realize until very recently, I think until we were speaking, and I was kind of reflecting on this myself. And I'm generally fine, in the nature of my job, you take on people's issues and problems, and that's part of it. That's what I find exciting. That's what I find rewarding. But there's a toll to it, and I think over the years, I've probably found music as a really helpful outlet, and I've never really thought about it like that. So I often drive kind of for hours on end, traveling up and down the country for different reasons, and I always have to listen to something. It also has to be loud. It also has to be something that I can sing along with. So, and I do that all the time. But I think it's very cathartic for me. It's a way of releasing kind of tensions, releasing stress, and it's just amazing.
And I think there's a connection to stress and ADHD as well. Is there?
Yeah. Well, people with ADHD have more active parts of the limbic system. So the limbic system are the emotional centers of your brain, and they have a less active prefrontal cortex, which is more the rational part of the brain. So, what does that mean in real life? It means that people with ADHD can feel things deeper, can be more reactive to things that happen, and are less able to take stock in the moment, because you can't have your emotional centers high and also your rational centers high as well. When your emotions go up, your rational thinking goes down. And we're always kind of told, don't do anything in the heat of the moment. And most of us, if we don't act in the heat of the moment, we do something differently if we thought about it the next day.
Yes.
So that's what we see. It's ADHD is grounded in the neurobiology. So there's increased activity in the emotional centers, so people can feel deeper and be more reactive. And that's what we see.
And I think, to your point, social media, I just read this. An MD friend of mine just posted this on his stories. I'm completely stealing this, but it was so brilliant. Social media connects our limbic parts of our brain, not our logical parts of our brain. And I think, and this is my issue with so many of these influencers, is especially in the ADHD world, is they really cater to that. And I think it's unfortunate. And what I've done in the process is I apply heavy filters. As soon as something comes across my feed that I know is designed for my limbic system, automatic, nope.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The way social media is designed, there's nothing that is there by coincidence. So social media is there designed to hack your emotional centers.
Yes.
Because most of us, we like to think we make decisions by super intelligence, but it's often how we feel about things. So that's why there's a limit. As a content creator, we're both content creators. Kind of have just a few seconds to engage someone, because they haven't heard what you've said. They're not using their rational mind. It's, well, what does it look like? How stimulating is it? How appealing is it? Something to do with the initial music, the first few beats, or what the person looks like, or the colors. So it is hacking that limbic system, and what's appealing to those primitive emotional states is what kind of flies and what goes kind of viral. People listen less, and they react more on emotion.
Yes,
and that's how it's designed, and that's how it can be so addictive.
You're exactly right, and I think, man, we've covered a lot of bases. Like, I feel like we could have another 2 hours of this. Maybe we should have another conversation. But like, man, what I love so much, even in this last hour that we've been talking, or a lot more. I have learned so much more, and I hope other people have as well. Because number one, where do we find you on social media? Like, what's your biggest?
So I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Dr. Ali Ajaz, and I don't think there's any clones at the moment or any other Dr. Ali Ajaz.
You're not that popular yet.
No. So I'm not that famous, but I'd rather be slightly under the radar and than have all those problems. So at Dr. Ali Ajaz on Instagram and TikTok, and I have a website, draliajaz.co.uk.
I love it.
Some people want to work with me, then they can book things through there. But really, there's enough stuff on my social media, knowledge, tips, advice. I kind of lay it out there, because these things don't have to be hidden. You don't have to pay a doctor in order to get the knowledge from them. I'm a firm believer of that. Things are going to come to us.
I really believe what we're doing. we are doing the most important work, because the highest cost to society right now is medical failures. And these are primarily rooted in nutrition. So we need to fix that soon. Or what's your medical system? What's it called?
The NHS. The
NHS. Yeah, and it's going to be bankrupt. Canada, same problem. United States, and I'm sure in many parts of the world. We have to fix these things primarily ourselves through our behavior as a start.
Yeah, it's being empowered. So feeling as though you can take ownership around your health, because everything around you tells you that you can't. Oh, you're not an expert.
Right.
Well, you're not a doctor. What degrees do you have?
Right. And I think we need to start with that.
Yeah. So I start with, my starting point is that most people are intelligent, sensible people. Okay, until they prove otherwise.
Right.
So if you give the knowledge, people will do what they want with it.
Yes.
And most people will do sensible things with it. And I think that's how it's always been, right? There's just too much censorship around, and
I think so too.
When I talk about certain things, when it comes to ADHD, I get a lot of heat from doctors, from the people. And I've had doctors complain about me to my regulatory body because they don't like what I'm saying. And it's always when I'm saying that essentially doctors are failing patients, and they don't like that.
I think that's a tragedy for so many reasons, because you really, as far as I've seen, I'm sure there's others like you in the world, but I haven't seen them, which is I've seen these influencers that are not doctors, and they do have some important information, but it's mixed with bad. And you are the only person I've seen that's a medical doctor, psychiatrist, that also preaches this holistic balance. And that's why I'm so glad and so grateful you're on here. And my goal is to amplify what we just talked about as much as I can.
Thank you very much. But I'm certainly not unique, and I have to acknowledge people that have been inspirational for me.
Good.
And there are actually two American doctors, Dr. Daniel Amen, who I had the pleasure of meeting a year ago.
I read his books years ago. Me too. Okay, I'm a fan.
Yeah. So he's been a big inspiration. So for me, being conventionally trained and having all that kind of dogma around a treatment is something that masks symptoms, i.e. a drug.
Right.
Or it's a surgical procedure where you whop out the thing, so it's no longer a problem, right? From going from that type of medicine to really having my mind and soul essentially opened up. Dr. Amen's played a massive role in that. And he's still active. He's got Amen clinics in America. And Dr. Mark Hyman, who's also very well known and regarded and respected as a functional health doctor, and people that he's worked with, and his podcasts and his books.
He focuses on aging, but
now he's focusing a lot more on aging. Maybe because he's a lot older himself.
Yeah, he's in his 60s somewhere.
Yeah. But so they've been very, very instrumental for me, and so I'm certainly not unique in this way.
I would say, but in the ADHD world, because Dr. Amen, he's not ADHD focused, as far as I know.
He does some stuff in ADHD, for sure. Yeah, brain and
I want to link you with a friend of mine. Have you heard of Dr. Brain? Like Ben Rain? Have you heard of him? He's got a huge following, over 1 million people. We're pretty good friends. Like, he's come to Vegas. We've hung out. Cool. Really, he's a brain scientist. I would love to link you guys together. Really good guy.
Let's do it.
Young guy. He was like one of the youngest scientists in Stanford, like in his 20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I would love to link you guys. I think my dream, if you ever want to know my dream, is to have I want to turn my podcast, and I don't see this online, but into a round table. I think that would make the conversation, and we pick a topic, and we I would love to have, I had a health dietitian on. There's a ton of misinformation here in the United States. So there's a big battle between, the experts and the sort of influencers. And I see, I would say I'm 80% in favor of the experts. And I do think there is truth to what the influencers are saying. And I think that they are dismissed too much by the expert side. And you're one of the first that really, I would have to say, for me, especially being someone with ADHD, not only do you resonate, because I do actually get really upset at some of these influencers that I think peddle misinformation. And everything you've ever said not only resonates with my personal experience, but then has been these incredible insights that I hope our conversation helps other people as well.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. Very nice of you.
So thank you for coming on, man. I would love to do this again. And if I'm ever back in London, man, you got a front row seat to my show.
Oh, that's amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.